This lesson is on connecting with others through love. You know, part of who we are and what we're committed to be as Christians has this idea that we'll connect with people the way God has intended us to. As part of this lesson, I'm going to discuss three main questions. The first question is, why is it so important for us to connect with others? The second question is, how do we connect with other people? And the third question is, what now? How do we put this into action? What do we do with this information that we're going to be discussing here? Question number one, why is it so important for us to connect with others? When answering this question, the first thing we need to look at is the fact that we are commanded to. The scriptures are very clear about this. In fact, in 1 John chapter 3, verse 11, John tells us that, "For this is the message that you have heard from the beginning, that we should love one another." So there's this idea that from the very beginning, from creation even, that there's this idea that we're built to love one another. In Matthew chapter 22, verses 36 through 40, Jesus is approaching. It says, "Teacher, which is the great commandment in the law?" This is where we get our great commandment from the scriptures. And he, Jesus, said to him, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind. This is the first and great commandment. And the second is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. On these two commandments depend all the law and the prophets." The idea here that we should love your neighbor as yourself is being one of the great two commandments, to love God and to love each other. And the fact that the entire law and the prophets depend on this. You know, in Jesus' time, the law and the prophets was the Old Testament. There was no Old Testament and New Testament. Jesus was the New Testament. And for him to refer to the law and the prophets here, saying that all of the law and prophets depend on these two commandments, that you love God and love each other, is huge, because at that time the law and the prophets was every bit of scripture, every bit of the Bible that existed at that point. You know, so for Jesus to say that the core message of everything from Genesis through Malachi up to that point depended on the fact that we love God and we love each other is huge. So the idea continues that all of Scripture is based on this fact, that we are to love one another as well as love God. Also in Luke chapter 6, verses 27 and 28, it reads, "But I say to you who hear, love your enemies." Who are we to love? Just the people that we sit next to in church, just the people that we like, the cool ones, our friends at work. No, we're to love even our enemies. It continues to do good to those who hate you, bless those who curse you, and pray for those who abuse you. Are we to love Osama bin Laden? Yeah. We don't have to like him, and we don't have to agree with his actions, but we're supposed to look at him with a heart of love. So this idea that about love, we are supposed to love and connect with everybody. There is no exception. As Christians, we're called to love and connect with people. That's what God intended. My second point is that this is how we evangelize. You know, in 1 Corinthians chapter 9, specifically in verse 22, but I'm going to read starting in verse 19 for you. It reads like this. Paul writes, "For though I am free from all, I have made myself a servant to all, that I might win more of them. To the Jews I became as a Jew in order to win Jews. To those under the law I became as one under the law, though not being myself under the law, that I might win those under the law. To those outside the law, I became as one outside the law, not being outside the law of God, but under the law of Christ, that I might win those outside the law. Here's the key verse here in verse 22. To the weak I became weak, that I might win the weak. Why? I have become all things to all people, that by all means I might save some. And it continues in verse 23. I do it all for the sake of the gospel, that I may share with them in its blessings. I believe what Paul's talking about here isn't the fact that he's compromising and giving himself completely to these other ideologies and stuff. No, I think what he's talking about is the fact that he needs to relate to people and connect with people and identify with them on their own level. You know, it's one thing for him to go around and preach the gospel message, being exactly who he is, and not trying to identify and relate to the people that he's sharing the message with. It's something completely different for him to relate to them first. You know, people don't care that you know until they know that you care. And my third point to answer this question, why is it so important for us to connect with others, really has its root in this idea that it's how we evangelize. But the third point here is that hell is real. Hell is real. You know, Revelation chapter 20 talks about this in verse 10. And it reads, and the devil who had deceived them was thrown into the lake of fire and sulfur, where the beast and the false prophet were, and they will be tormented day and night forever and ever. You know, here it doesn't talk about people being there. It talks about a place of torment where the devil and the beast and the false prophet are. You know, but it presents the idea that hell, the lake of fire and sulfur, is a real place where there's torment day and night forever and ever. You know, it continues in Revelation chapter 20 verse 15 to read that, and if anyone's name was not found written in the book of life, he was thrown into the lake of fire. So now here's the idea that not only does that lake of fire, place of eternal torment, exist, but the fact that there's some people going to be thrown in there as well too, if they're not written in the book of life, if they have not given their lives to God. You know, this is a revelation I think that we all need to get a hold of. As Christians, we need to understand exactly how real hell really is and how horrible of a place it is. You know, I've read a book recently by a lady named Mary Kay Baxter called A Divine Revelation of Hell, and I know there are several other books similar to it, but this book is based on the idea that God is giving this woman a vision, basically, of taking her into hell and showing her hell, giving her a grand tour, so that she could see exactly how horrible it is and document it. The one thing that really strikes me in this book is that even as she writes this book, she starts describing some of the things that she's seen, and some of them end up being so horrible and scary that she almost just stops as she's writing and breaks down and says, "Reader, please understand, we can't let anybody go to this place. It's that horrible." If we all had that kind of revelation of how bad and how horrible the place hell really is, we too would not want to see anybody go there ever. So let me ask you again, why is it so important for us to connect with others? Well, not only are we commanded to, and that Paul gives us the example of this is how we evangelize, we connect with other people to win them for the gospel, but there's a reason behind that as well. that hell is a very real place and nobody should go there, and if we don't connect with people for the sake of the gospel, as Paul talks about, that's where people will end up.